particular bill. I understand Ms. Songas wishes to introduce the sponsor of the bill, and I'll recognize you for that.
Yes, it's my honor to be here to introduce my newest colleague from Massachusetts, although we're soon to be joined by yet another who has gained the seat that held by our longstanding ranking member here, Mr. Markey. But it's been my honor to serve with Representative Kennedy, and I very much appreciate the legislation that he's introducing today, and I'm strongly supportive of it. To give you a sense of history, my husband, Paul, was in the first group that went to Ethiopia after the Peace Corps was formed. My daughter, Ashley, went to Madagascar in the early 2000, and their experiences changed their lives. So yes, we have had over 200,000 Peace Corps volunteers make their way into the developing nations and have added great value, and I think increased our moral standing as a result of it, but it's no denying it also changes the lives of those who serve, who come back to seek to find many ways to contribute to our country. And I know that's the case for Representative Kennedy, and I introduce you.
Mr. Kennedy, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very, excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Congresswoman Songas, for the extraordinary introduction. I want to thank the ranking member and the ranking member of the full committee as well, and my colleagues for making the time for me this morning and for this bill this morning. I can't promise it's going to be as entertaining as maybe you had hoped, or perhaps certainly not speaking of the doomsday scenarios that you might be envisioning, but nevertheless an important piece of legislation in my mind. I also want to thank Congressman Petrie for his extraordinary history of service, our former fellow Peace Corps volunteer, and his dedication to public service throughout his career. I think we might be joined by some other Peace Corps brethren at some point over the course of the hearing. Congressman Farr, Congressman Honda, and Congressman Garamendi, I know, also expressed their interest if they can, might try to stop by. H.R. 915, otherwise known as the Peace Corps Commemoration Act, is a bipartisan piece of legislation that seeks to authorize to erect a small commemorative here in our nation's capital in honor of the Peace Corps. The modest memorial will be funded completely through private contributions and require no taxpayer funds. I appear before this committee today as one of over 210,000 returned Peace Corps volunteers who have served collectively in 139 different countries across the globe for the past 52 years. I think, like many of my fellow volunteers, trying to find the right words to sum up over 27 months of service is always difficult, and I will spare you the long stories, but I hoped to share a brief one with all of you that illustrated, I think, illustrated my time and the effect it had on me. About a year into my service into the Dominican Republic, I was on a bus, kind of a larger minivan called a guagua, on the way back to the capital, Santo Domingo, to have some meetings at our Peace Corps office. Minivan was meant for about 8 or 10, and there was probably about 18 people in it. I was in the second to last row with a backpack on my lap, and I got a tap on my shoulder. The gentleman behind me, an older gentleman, asked, "Cuerpo de Paz?" inquiring if I was a Peace Corps volunteer. Apparently, I didn't quite blend in quite as well as I had hoped. I said yes, and he went on to tell me that decades before, when he was growing up, he lived in a small village on the outskirts of Santo Domingo in the mountains that didn't have access to running water until a Peace Corps volunteer arrived. And he, with the community, helped construct a set of pipes to bring drinkable water to the village, to save them hours of treks each way every day. Without ever asking his name, asking my name or offering his, he then thanked me, not for my work, but for the work that other volunteer had done all those decades before, whom, as a little boy, he never got the opportunity to say thank you to. A couple moments later, he got off the bus, and I never saw him again. That, to me, is what I believe Peace Corps is all about. Not about the accomplishments of any one person or volunteer, but about the way the combined contributions of service comes together to tell the story of a country that is at its very best version of itself, a country that might be an example and a beacon for the rest of the world. Tomorrow, this country remembers a young American president that called a nation to serve. A confident dreamer with a distinct Boston accent who put his faith in a country that at the time was struggling to keep faith in itself. In spreading a missive of service and citizenship, President John F. Kennedy moved a generation of civic soldiers to get off the sidelines and put their talent to work for this nation. Today, you can find those men and women in the Peace Corps, in our armed forces, in a soup kitchen in Chicago, a community health center in Georgia, and a legal aid clinic in California. You can find them right here in the halls of Congress, a generation inspired to change their country by a president who knew that they could. But as the years pass, the distance will grow between the current day and those that bore witness to that time in our history. So we will have to work harder to remember not just President Kennedy's individual accomplishments, as we do any leader of our great nation, but the faith and the fearlessness that he brought to a people who were in need of someone to cheer them on. And that unshakable belief that he held that if we could export the fruits of our labor and the fruits of our land, then we could surely export the most fundamental and precious commodity of all, our values. That is the conviction at the very heart of the Peace Corps and the legacy that this legislation hopes to help commemorate in its own simple and modest way. Not the achievements of one man, but the potential of a people who are challenged to change the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr.